This is our last virtual field trip, at least that we've got on the books right now. And we saved the best for last. I'm here at Lake Annie. And the reason I picked this as the last one is that the field trips all this month have been to places that we normally bring our summer campers. We have week-long summer camps normally. And on Friday, we go to the lake for a Friday fun day at the lake and take the kids out swimming, bring a watermelon out and throw it in the water and fight over the watermelon. It's lots of fun. Of course, we have a lifeguard and we're looking out for gators when we're doing it. So I've never really given a tour here. I've brought kids out here for summer camp, but we're more playing than anything. So it was fun for me to do a little bit of homework on this one and learn more about the history and the plants and the research that we do here at Lake Annie. Now you can see it behind me here. I'm on the dock. This dock is the only piece of development around the lake. There's no houses here. This is an almost pristine lake. You might hear vehicles though. We are next to the highway. So even though this is an undeveloped lake, it still there's a railroad that goes on one side and a highway on the north end of it. But let me give you a little better view here. I'm going to switch my camera around. Here is the lake. Our summer campers love coming out here. And one of the things that's so special is they're some of the only people allowed to come to Lake Annie. Archbold Biological Station bought Lake Annie in 1983. This is private property and it is not open to the public. Some people that grew up around here might remember coming out fishing and that kind of thing back in the 1960s or the 1970s. But after Archbold purchased it, we did have problems with, oops, sorry, that's crooked. We did have some problems with trash getting in the lake from people coming in here. So it is off limits. It is for research purposes only, and for summer campers too. But you can see it is just a gorgeous, gorgeous lake. Let me turn this back around. This is 90 acres. And my plan for the day is first I'm just going to show you around a little bit some of the plants that are right here next to the dock. But you might be able to see behind me, I've brought a kayak. That's why I've got my life vest on. I'm going to hop in the kayak with my selfie stick and see how it goes. Hopefully my phone doesn't drop in the water. I've got a couple of videos we're gonna show too, but we're gonna do it today. We're gonna do a live field trip from a kayak with my selfie stick propped in between my legs. That's what's happening today. Okay, let's just take a look at some of the plants that are growing here. So right when you first get to the dock and get to Lake Annie, you'll see this beautiful tree here with the red seeds on it. Let me move my camera around. Sorry if that's blurry there. Here we go. These beautiful red seeds. This is a holly. Pretty sure this one's a Dune Holly. And I love this one. It's just a nice greeting when you get to the lake to see these pretty red berries. I wish I would have gotten my camera on it. There was a dragonfly right now. Oh no, there it is. It's still there. Whoa, okay. I'm going to put my macro lens. Sorry, y'all. It's gonna take me a second. I'm gonna put my macro lens on on the phone, and if this dragonfly hasn't moved, if we're really lucky, real lucky, then we'll actually get to see this guy. So let me turn this around. So here we've got this beautiful purple and blue dragonfly. And I'm gonna get up a little closer. A little closer. There he is. I'll see if he lands back on there again. There he goes. Let me get a little closer again. A little closer. Let's see if I can get him in focus. Oh, he's gonna take off. There he is. This lake and this area, actually, Highlands County, is it was a damselfly, is a great place for dragonflies because its location is in south central Florida. So we've got species that are, the range is more north and the range is more south, and they come together right here at Lake Annie and in Highlands County. So it's a pretty good area for dragonflies. When I am in the kayak going around here, I just see them, all over the place. Put my wide angle back on again. There we go. So we had the holly there, and I'm also seeing behind me, we've got pine trees, South Florida slash pines right here. You might see there's a palm tree back there. That's the state tree of Florida, the cabbage palm. And let's get down here. Right in the water. This spot next to the dock, the kids love to come right here. Oh, I can see a little fish right there. There's minnows and mosquito fish in here, and sometimes the campers will come in with buckets and nets, and some of the kids want to swim. Other kids, they'll stay here for like an hour with their bucket, just trying to fill it up, getting these little minnows and mosquito fish right here. But here I am in the water. Let's get into the kayak. And if we're lucky, I won't fall over while doing this. Here we go. Oh, yay, it worked. Scooching up. Okay, I'm going to turn my selfie stick into a little tripod and put it between my legs. There we go. That looks pretty, looks pretty stable. Let's get out here. Beautiful morning. And I'll come out here. Is my phone water resistant? No. But I did practice this twice, and so far it hasn't fallen in the water. So if it does, I will be done with this field trip very quickly. You might be wondering what lives out here. I mentioned we've got the little, the little fishes in there. We've got bigger fishes too. There's largemouth bass in here, brim. There's, what else do we have? Oh, there's one with that funky name. It's like a lake chub sucker or something like that. One of you might remember. Put it in the chat. For mammals, there's otters. I've never seen one out here, but they're on the list. I've seen them nearby. There could potentially be some of the Florida muskrats out here, but I don't know if anybody's seen one right here. We do have them on the Archbold property, though. Alligators. Yes, definitely there's alligators. I've seen them many times out here. And, we just keep an eye out for them. And hopefully they behave themselves. We have softshell turtles. There's one that lives right near the dock, and I see it every summer. It's a full-size softshell turtle, probably the shell's like a foot long. And it's, pretty well behaved, though sometimes every once in a while it takes a little nibble off of someone that's swimming by the dock. But for the most part, it's pretty well behaved. Sometimes we see bald eagles here. That's pretty cool. And, the other fish that the other birds that you would think of as seeing around here, like different kinds of herons and stuff like that. The spot that I'm at right now, I'd say is probably about 5 feet deep, something like that, 6 feet deep maybe. Now that I'm getting away from the dock right there, I'm gonna stick to the side here, but just a little further ahead of me. If I start heading towards the middle, it'll drop to 30 feet, 40 feet, and then way out in the middle, which is where I am going, will be almost 70 feet deep out there. That is very deep for a Florida lake, about 70 feet deep. So you don't typically see too much of that. Lake Annie is part of a chain of lakes in Highlands County. And those of you who are familiar with this area, you'll know the names if I say Lake Placid, Lake June and Winter, Lake Istapoga. Those will be familiar names to you. This is actually the first lake in that whole chain. Even though it's the most southern lake, it's the highest elevation. So the water flows out. There's a little creek at the north end that flows to Lake Placid, which is just a mile away. And Lake Placid used to be called Lake Childs, who was the surveyor here in the 1800s, and Annie was his wife. So the two lakes were a mile apart from each other. We had Childs and Annie. That little creek there has a fun history because the water here is acidic. It's softer water than those other lakes I mentioned. And there's stories of back in the early 1900s, the homesteader pioneer families here would come to Lake Annie, and the young girls said that little creek, the outflow, was the best place to wash your hair, and that you couldn't get any softer hair than if you came to Lake Annie and went to the little creek there. So the water here flows to Lake Placid, then to Lake June, then to Lake Istapoga, which is a beautiful lake and good for fishing. And then it goes to Lake Okeechobee. That's the huge, big lake in Florida, and that's the mother of the Everglades. So we are part of the Everglades right here. We're in the northern Everglades, or the headwaters of the Everglades. There's not one lake that you can point to and say that lake is the start of the headwaters of the Everglades. It's a whole big region out here, 2.6 million acres, huge area. But this is one of those lakes that is in the headwaters. Another thing that's interesting about Lake Annie is if you look at a map of Florida, you'll notice that running up the center are just tons and tons of lakes for about 200 miles. Lake Annie is the southernmost of those lakes that run for 200 miles. And because they're so straight and they all look round, a little bit, most are probably formed the same way. Probably all are from ancient sinkholes where the limestone deep below us had a cave in long time ago, pulled the sand in, and created these circular lakes. When did that happen? Now, geologists don't know. But a lot of these lakes are on the Lake Wales Ridge, where I am right now, which is all sandy here, big old sand dune. And the ridge itself is at least 1 million years old, maybe several million years old. So was that when all these lakes formed? We don't know. What we do know is that people have been coming to the lakes in Florida for over 10,000 years. Sometimes people ask about Lake Annie in particular. Have we found any cool stuff here? And the answer is yes. A Florida historian named Devane came here in 1961, I believe it was, with his son, and they found an arrowhead and some pottery. When they looked it up, it was the same as was known from the Belglade people. Belglade is what we call people who lived, they kind of disappeared around 500 years ago, but they lived in this area. We don't know what their real name was. We don't know what language they spoke because once the Spanish got here and got to the inner part of the state, they weren't here anymore. But what was cool is that arrowhead. Because if you think about it, how are you going to make an arrowhead if you're on the Lake Wales Ridge? There are no rocks here. You have to dig down pretty far to get to some limestone. So it's an example of trade. Even if you were, an indigenous people or First Nations people in the middle of the state, you had trade networks. And the rock that was used for the arrowhead was actually from somewhere near Tampa, which is pretty cool. Well, I've got a video clip we're going to put on. It's about 5 minutes or so about some of the other history in the area, some of the things that have happened here, and then it's a little bit more about the lake while I make my way over to the buoy in the middle. Hopefully when the film is done, I'll be over there. In the late 1920s, Edison, Ford, and Firestone were traveling through Florida looking for an alternative plant to use to make rubber. And as they were traveling right by here, their car got stuck in the sand. So what did they do while they were waiting for someone to come along and help them get it out? Well, they came and hung out at Lake Annie. What if I told you that Lake Annie played a part in helping the Allied forces win World War II? Yeah, it's actually true. In the 1930s, in 1935, right here at Lake Annie, a new type of vehicle, an amphibious tractor, an armored vehicle that could kind of act like a boat, but then also come out of the water and move through difficult terrain, was tested. This was the first place that the first Amtrak or amphibious tractor was tested. This ended up being a really big boon for the United States military, who used these in World War II fighting the Japanese. And what they did is soldiers could use these to get off of the ships onto land and be protected from gunfire as they were doing it. How did Archbold Biological Station and Lake Annie end up becoming part of World War II history? Well, in the late 1920s, 1928, there was a really huge hurricane that ended up killing almost 2,000 people in Florida. Donald Roebling was a wealthy inventor and tinkerer. His father here at the Roebling estate, which became Archbold Biological Station, had sent workers over to try to rescue people after the hurricane. But they found that this was really a tragedy, and there were a lot of losses of life that maybe wouldn't have happened if they had a vehicle that could have gotten through all of those flooded areas. So he challenged his son Donald to build the first amphibian tractor. Donald spent years and years and years perfecting this, but his first model was tried out right here at Lake Annie. Pretty cool, right? The city of Dunedin actually made a pretty nice video about this history. Let's check it out on their YouTube page.
A workhorse of the Allied campaign in World War II, the Landing Vehicle Tract, the LVT, the Roebling Alligator, the Amtrak, whatever it was called, was first manufactured right here in Dunedin.
Right here, it's about 3 feet deep, but I'm going to head to the south center of the lake, the deepest part, where we have a scientific buoy out there. It is 68 feet, which is very deep for a Florida lake. There were samples taken from down there, and the researchers could actually look at the layers of pollen going back for 37,000 years, giving them a picture of how the ecosystem has changed here. So we can see that back 37,000 years ago, it was a bit drier around here, which makes sense. It was the Ice Age after all. And some of the plants that we have on our highest, driest parts of our property today used to actually be much more common than the scrub oaks that we now have all over the place. One common question we get about Lake Annie is, where does the water come from? Is it a spring-fed lake? Well, no, it's not. The water here comes from two sources, rainfall and groundwater. If you're here during a rainy year, you're gonna see this water go up quite a bit. I remember when Hurricane Irma came through in 2017. Just a couple days after the hurricane, I drove down here and wanted to see what the lake looked like. The water was so high that I couldn't even see the dock. All right, I made it. I'm here at the Lake Annie buoy. Actually, it was like perfect time. I got here just as the video was ending. So I'm gonna show you the buoy a little bit here, and then I'll have another video for you. But one thing I forgot to say at the beginning is we have two guests that will be here for the Q&A. So we'll have a question and answer session, maybe 15 minutes long or so. We have Dr. Hilary Swain, who's the director here. We also have Dr. Evelyn Gaiser, who isn't stationed here. She's at Florida International University, but she is the main researcher that works on this buoy. And you're gonna see a video of her in a minute. Don't share it yet, Laura. And they'll be able to answer all kinds of questions about the history of the research and what exactly we're doing with the buoy. But here we go, I'll turn my camera around a little bit. Environmental monitoring buoy. And it looks a little bit like a floating weather station because it kind of is a floating weather station. If we look up there, you can see an antenna. This is transmitting this data. Every 15 minutes, it's recording new information from what's happening below us there. So we have to actually have all that data sorted, which is something that people don't always think about with biology. You might think of somebody coming out, catching some fish and counting them, writing them down in their science notebook. But it's also the era of big data. And it's not like it was in the day where in the 1930s when we started, when the Roeblings started tracking the water depth out here, where I'm not sure how often they came out, once a week or once a month or what. Now it's every 15 minutes. Pretty amazing. We can see this is solar panel right there. If I come around a little bit, I'm not sure if you can see it. You can see where it takes it's got the temperature gauge. And this part next to me that it looks like scuba tanks, that's the data logger. And going down below me, I'm not going to pull it up here, but going down below me is a rope. And on that rope, I think it's every meter going all the way to the bottom of the lake are the sensors tracking temperature. I'm not sure what else exactly they're checking down there. But we have to also come out here. Our land manager, Kevin Main, comes out I think it's every 2 weeks. He brought me out a few days ago and showed me the stuff that he does out here. It's pretty cool. One of the tests that we do out here is looking at how clear the water is. And that's pretty interesting because it's something that we've seen change over time. Folks who visited here back in the 60s and 70s would remark on how clear it was, that the water was just super clear here. And now if you come out, it's not that clear. It looks like tea. So what's going on there? Did Archbold, do something funky and make the water get dark? Well, no. This is so crazy. Because we have such long-term data on these things, we can really get a picture of it. And what the researchers notice is that things that are going on out in the Atlantic Ocean that take decades to happen out there seem to be in correlation with how dark the water gets in Lake Annie, which is, pretty amazing. And when Hilary and Evelyn are on later, you can ask some more questions about that. This buoy and this lake is part of a big global network of lake scientists called GLEON, a global lakes organization. So there's buoys like this, all over the world. And it's really important because, you know, water is life, and monitoring these lakes in different parts of the world can help us understand the health of the ecosystems and see change over time. Lake Annie is particularly important because it's such a pristine lake. It's the head of this chain of lakes here, so it doesn't have a large area that's draining into it. Most of the land draining into it is on Archbold's property, which is, you know, nature preserve. So the water's pretty clean. It's one of the most pristine lakes in all of South Florida. The other lakes around here that you see, just about all of them will have houses on there, you know, different kinds of development, motorboats, all that stuff going on, which, you know, is wonderful and fun and all of that. But it's nice to have at least one lake without that, because it can tell us, it's a bit like a time machine in some ways. It could tell us probably what all these other lakes were like 100 years ago. But it's also a way for us to measure when there are changes happening here in such a pristine lake. That's, you know, really helpful to know. Well, what I want to do is pull up another video. This is actually a TED Talk. It's an 18-minute TED Talk, but we're going to just go click through it, and it's cut down to about 5.5 minutes. I encourage you to watch the whole thing. It's about Lake Annie music. So Laura, let's share that video of the Lake Annie music.
Well, now I'm a freshwater ecologist, and I study lakes and wetlands for a living. We all know that the world is changing, right? It's changing so much, and it's changing so fast. Well, it turns out that lakes are just our best sentinels of these changes. They tell us what's going on with the planet. Now, I take care of the buoy on Lake Annie. It's sort of a joint custody situation with the folks at the biological station who visit the buoy every month and record the data and help take care of the instruments. And the Lake Annie, like all the Glen buoys, has a string of thermometers that extend down from the top to the bottom of the 60-foot deep lake. And those thermometers are recording temperatures every 15 minutes, and they provide us information like this. This is a cross-section of a lake showing the distribution of water temperatures from top to bottom. The summer of 2009 to this very cold winter of 2010. On top of this heat map, we have the actual weekly average temperature values from the top, middle, and bottom of the lake. And as a scientist, I looked at this and I saw the typical seasonal pattern and that cold spell that happened in the winter. But I also, as a musician, saw something else. I saw music. And so I couldn't help myself. I took the data and I took the average of all those water temperatures, and I called that middle C on the piano. Oops. And I assigned for every degree warmer, 1 note higher. And for every degree colder, 1 note lower. And so with every temperature assigned to a note, we can actually listen to that transition from winter to summer in the surface waters of this lake. And it sounds like this. You can hear that transition as we go from winter to summer. And if we contrast that to the bottom waters that are cold all year round, we hear something like this. Really static, low notes, until we get to that cold snap, which was the coldest freeze on record. Researchers tell us that the human ear can discern differences and changes more acutely than the eye can see them. And for this reason, scientists and musicians from all around the world are coming together to explore data through music. And they're allowing nature to write songs like this. So for me, and perhaps for you, music might just be the best tool we have for exploring the complexities of nature. And so now I'd like to leave you with 3 years of a song written in effect by Lake Annie and interpreted by me and arranged and performed by our FIU School of Music students. This is Lake Annie's song.
Wow. That's the first time that I've listened to that while I was actually out here paddling on the lake. And wow, Evelyn, you are so cool. To be able to be in the water paddling on a lake while listening to the temperatures of the lake performed like that, oh, it's like gives you goosebumps. Whoa. Oh gosh. Well, we did it. My phone has not fallen in the water, and I'm going to consider that a success for the day. I appreciate you all joining me for not only our first virtual tour of the lake, literally my first tour I've ever given anybody at the lake. I hope you had a good time. We do have our special guests that are going to pop in now and help us with the Q&A. And this is a real treat. This is one of those things where having the virtual field trips allows us to do things that we just would really not be able to do in real life, to bring together all these specialists like that. So I want to thank them for coming on. And Hillary and Evelyn, why don't you get your videos on? And Evelyn, could you just introduce yourself a little bit before we start doing the questions? And tell us.
Hi, everybody. Sure. Sorry. I'm just so excited to be able to be virtually out on the lake. I've really missed it. My name is Evelyn Gaiser, and I'm an ecologist, and I study lakes and wetlands. I'm down here in Miami. I'm a professor at Florida International University, and I've had the real privilege to be able to study Lake Annie for some 15 years or so. And just really glad that you guys all got that virtual tour out there today. Thank you, Dustin.
Thank you. Hey, Hillary, I think it'd be fun. Do you want to maybe tell us your first experience with Lake Annie, or how far back does your Lake Annie experience go?
Well, I came to Archbold at the end of '95, so I think one of my very first experiences at Archbold was Lake Annie. My children were quite young then, and they really loved going to Lake Annie. And when I first arrived, it was incredibly clear. You could see a long way down into the lake. And then in the late 90s, well, really from 96 onwards, the lake started getting darker and darker. It wasn't cloudy, it was just darker, a bit like a very peaty sort of, Dustin described it like a cup of tea. And people started saying to me, what are you doing to Lake Annie, Hillary? And I was like, we're not doing anything to Lake Annie, I don't think. And everyone said, oh, I think it's all fertilizer that everybody's doing, or the pumping that they're doing, and it took Evelyn, largely Evelyn, and Archbold staff a long time to work out that answer. And I'm going to hand it over to Evelyn to tell that story. But I think what has been wonderful for me for Lake Annie is to get it to know it as a place, which I really love, but also to really use the data we've collected to explain what's happening and to share it with lots of other people like you all. So I hope you'll ask us lots of questions, but maybe Evelyn can give you the quick 1, 2, 3 of why Lake Annie gets darker and lighter at other times.
Sure. So I had the same kind of experience as Hillary in that my first visit to the lake was in the late 90s too. And oh boy, you could see all the way down to the bottom, way out deep in 10, 15 meters. And so we were really curious, and we had the privilege of these very long-term data from people going out onto the lake and taking water samples and measuring water temperature from the top to the bottom every month for, at that time, I think it was 25 years when we were trying to figure out what's going on. And we also learned so much from the fact that there was a weather station that's been out on the property for even way, way longer, and recording the kinds of changes that are going on with the weather, as well as really deep wells that measure the depth of the water underground. And it was necessary to put all of that information together in order to figure out what was going on. And it turned out that there are times when South Florida receives a whole lot of rainfall all at once. And that rainfall often comes in the form of tropical storms and sometimes hurricanes. And there are bunches of years where you may be more likely to, or we may be more likely to get those kinds of storms. And those phases where it's either a whole lot more stormy or a whole lot less stormy are actually connected, as Dustin mentioned, to the water temperature way out in the ocean. And that ocean temperature cycles on a 30 to 40 year period where there are warm phases and then cold phases. And during those warm phases are when we have more likely to have those great big rainy events. And when it's rainy like that, that water percolates through all those wetlands and forests that you saw behind Dustin as he's paddling around. And that's the source of all that tea-colored material, and causes the lake then to be kind of dark. And then if it's not so rainy year after year after year, the lake begins to clear up. And so we've seen this incredible cycling from the super clear years to the super dark years that appears to be controlled all the way by the ocean, way far away. And so that was super exciting to use these long-term data to find out the answer to that big pressing question. I see some questions coming in here.
Yeah, Laura, do you want to help us with some questions and see what people want to know?
Yes, I have a question from Kai, and we answered it in the chat, but if you want to talk a little more about it, Kai asked, when was the buoy put out on the lake?
Hey, good job, Kai. That's one of our summer campers this week.
Mm-hmm.
Aw. Well, so we are, as Dustin mentioned, part of this Global Lakes Ecological Observatory Network. And there are these buoys distributed all around the world. And it takes quite a bit of technical expertise to get these kinds of instruments and platforms deployed. And so we were able to host a meeting of all these global experts in lakes and the technology for measuring lakes. And we did that in 2008, and we were able to get the buoy deployed and all the instruments running. And it was super exciting to have it all launched.
Nice. And I know we are in planning for a new buoy to put on the lake. Would you like to tell a little bit about that?
Well, Hillary, would you like to talk a bit about that?
I could, yeah. Although it is a team effort.
Mm-hmm.
So the old buoy's getting kind of past its sell-by date. You know what I mean? It's needing it's getting quite old. It's been out there for more than 10 years, and it's really struggling with some of the data. So we got a nice grant from the National Science Foundation to get us to put out a new buoy. And it's already been built, and it's going to have lots of new instruments. And a special aspect of it is the instruments we've got. At the minute, we can only collect temperature every 15 minutes from the top of the buoy on the lake to the bottom of the lake. But the new buoy is going to have a special instrument that sort of reels itself out probably once every half hour up and down. So we'll be able to collect lots of other really important information, like how acidic is the lake and how much oxygen is there from the top to the bottom, as well as the temperature. And that's just going to open our eyes, because we at the minute can only collect those data every month. So it's going to be a whole new chapter in the book about the information about Lake Annie. So we're really excited about that. Thanks for that question.
Awesome. So we had one more question. It says, how many buoys are there? We know there's one in Lake Annie, but do you have a number like in your whole network?
There are a lot of buoys distributed around the world, and not all of them are a part of the Global Lakes Network, but I think within the network there's hundreds, and definitely, yeah, there's lots of lakes with sensors of different sorts, and some of those are deployed on these buoys. And I'm just going to look real quick to see if there's a map of those that I could post in the chat.
Okay, great. So
you can share your screen too, Evelyn, if you pull the website up.
Oh, okay.
Yep.
Cool. 1 second. Let's see if I can find it.
All right. Let me know when you're ready. I'll go on to the next question. Other than temperature, has there been any other tests on the lake, microbiological or chemical screening?
There sure have.
Evelyn, do you want me to start answering that while you're doing the buoy search, or do you want to do it?
Either way, I found the page with the map.
Okay.
The buoys. This is kind of cool. I don't know if I can just go ahead and share screen to address that one, and then.
Let me make you a co-host first.
Oh, okay.
So I'll answer the biochemical one while you're getting that ready.
Yeah, perfect.
So we do some basic chemistry at Archbold, but we're also where the lake is sampled by the Southwest Florida Water Management District, and they do some really in-depth chemistry, things like nutrient levels, nitrogen, phosphorus, and lots of other things. Lots of analytics like levels of sort of cations and anions would be the way to describe them. So different elements. So we have some long-term data. The other network that samples the lake is called Lake Watch. And that's a very interesting program. If you want to know data about the chemistry of a lot of Florida lakes, check out the Lake Watch program at the University of Florida. There's several local here in Highlands County where volunteers collect samples and they provide the data. So that might be interesting for you. I'll look up the website and put it in the chat for you while I'm doing that. But that's a very interesting way to get involved in sampling lakes, is to find out who's doing Lake Watch at one of the other lakes in Highlands County. We do it for Lake Annie. Good question.
Mm-hmm. Great answer. All right, I have a question for Dustin, if you're available, Dustin.
Well, do we want to talk about the number of buoys first, Laura? They're up on the screen.
Sure.
Yeah, I just found the big long list. I don't know if it tallies them up, but you can see the map here.
Oh, nice.
For some reason, we've told them this Lake Annie is a little bit misplaced there. It should be moved down a little bit. But you can see that they're distributed all around the world. And even, you know, we do some comparative studies with people in New Zealand to see how lakes look in New Zealand compared to Lake Annie. There's one in Antarctica, all over South America. We're working on getting some in Africa. Actually, there is one now on Lake Tanganyika that hasn't been added to the map yet. But you can see where all these buoys are, and that we can then compare what we're learning in Lake Annie to what folks are finding all over the world.
Fantastic. And that Gleon map is public? Like anyone can go and see it?
Let me put it in the chat.
Excellent. Okay, Dustin, you talked about the fish a little bit. We have a couple of questions about how many kinds of fish are there, and do you know much about the population of fish in the lake?
Gotcha. I've got my handy dandy cheat sheet right here. So I wrote some of that down. So this is kind of interesting. There's 3 dominant species: bluegill, largemouth bass, and lake chubsucker. And they comprised 90% of the total biomass of the fishes that were regularly checked out here. That's an old report. That was from the 1970s when they did that. So I don't know if there's been any other invasive fish or that kind of thing that have come in here. I just realized that I've been sharing the wrong camera. There we go. So
beautiful.
It is, yeah, it is. I mean, it's awesome out here. I should do all of my tours through kayak from now. So yeah, the different lake levels have different fish in them. I'm over on the edge here, surrounded by emergent vegetation. I see 1, 2, 3 little minnows going past me, and I've seen some other fish that maybe are about that big going by. So there are a lot of fish out here, and I mean, Hillary, do you want to jump in on that one? I'm sure you know more about how many. I don't know if we have any estimates.
I could try a bit. I put a link in the chat if anybody wants to go and find out the checklist. That's the list of species of fish that are known in Lake Annie. You can check it out there. Actually, to be honest, we've done far less work on fish than we've done on other aspects of the lake. We've done a lot of work on the chemistry of the lake and the sort of the physical properties of the lake, like temperature and oxygen. And then our biggest biological sampling, which Dr. Gaiser could talk about, is the plankton sampling. That's the biggest biology sampling we're doing. And we've done that very consistently now since 2005. We'd love someone who's really interested in fish to do more work on the lake. We had a University of Florida class that used to come every year and collect lots of information, and they always found really cool fish like bowfin and really neat fish in the lake. It's one of the areas where we don't know very much, and if we had more fish biologists working on the lake, we would learn more, because the important thing about Lake Annie is it's not fished. So we don't have recreational fishing out there. We don't. So it's a lake that really represents what fish populations would look like without fishing. One of the problems from that is that a lot of the money that's available to check on fish is on fish that are, fished recreationally. In other words, fishermen and fisherwomen are out there. So if you know someone who is a serious biologist, really interested in fish, let us know, because we'd love to add some more fish sampling into our work. But if you are interested, the website is in the chat, and I know Dustin will be able to share that with you later on as well. So you can learn about, there's, I think there's, somewhere in the mid-20s of species. And of course, there are new invasives coming in. We have a new cichlid called a dual cichlid. I don't know if it's in Lake Annie yet. So, we always have these new invasive species. And when scientists visit Lake Annie, they're not allowed to, there must be no use of invasive species like live bait or anything. We're very, very careful about what we put in Lake Annie to try and minimize the number of invasive species we're introducing on boat bottoms or with equipment and things. So it's really important to work hard to stop that happening. So thanks for that question. And sorry, we don't have more, but there's some good information in there. Check it out.
We also,
Right, thank you.
For invasive species, we do have torpedo grass growing along the edges. And we have done a little bit of removal on that, but and we've had volunteer college students actually come out and help with that. And I saw there was a question about pythons. Invasive pythons in Florida are, of course, a big deal. Right now, the question on whether they're in Highlands County or not depends on who you ask. There are sightings and people who are very sure that they've seen them. But as far as I know, nobody has any good photos of one. So maybe they're here, but nobody's really been able to prove it yet.
Thanks, Dustin.
Oh, go ahead.
One more. Go ahead.
I just saw a question in here about the clearer versus darker periods and how they affect the life conditions in the lake. By Cheryl Moffett, and I thought that's a really great question. It's something that we're still trying to figure out all the different ways that affects the biological communities. One of the things that appears to happen is that during the dark times, the light just isn't getting very far down through the water column, and things that need light, like algae, are then not as productive. So one of the things that the students in my lab have been doing is looking at the different species of algae and their abundance to try to figure out how they're changing during these darker and lighter periods. And what we see is that they're much less productive in the dark periods, and their production is limited to the upper parts of the water column. And then everything underneath about just 5 feet or 6 feet down is dark all the way down to that 70-foot deep place in the middle of the lake. And when it's super dark like that, it means that there's nothing to produce oxygen, which a lot of organisms, everything other than algae need to breathe. All the animals need the oxygen. And when it gets so anoxic, then it restricts those organisms to the upper portion of the lake. So it really changes where they can be and their habitat structure. And that's something that we'd love to know more about, how that affects things all the way up to the fishes. Is an important question.
All right. Juanita would like to know if the surrounding cattle ranches in the area add to the tea color of the lake.
Well, we don't, I see an answer in there from Hillary that we don't think that has much to do with it. The organic material that causes the tea color, it really comes from the leaching of materials from the leaves as they decompose. And so that mainly is coming from the forests that surround, the natural forests that surround the lake.
I think what Juanita might be thinking about are harmful algal blooms, which is different. Having dark colored water here isn't necessarily a problem. It's a natural process. It's just tea, right? It's the pine needles, the acorns, and the leaves, dissolving and putting the chemicals into the water. Florida does have a huge problem with toxic blue-green algae. We don't have it in Lake Annie right here. This is like, the test case for the best possible scenario. But in other parts of the headwaters and in the Everglades, they do. Remember, it's 2.6 million acres. So that water is flowing through ranches. And the ranches today have stopped using phosphorus, like at Buck Island Ranch, Archbold, we stopped using phosphorus in like 1986, I think. There's still a legacy of that in the soil, unfortunately. And, whoa, I must just, I should stop trying to touch things. But that watershed also includes Orlando. So it's not like it's just one person or one group of people. It's a huge region. It has the city there. It has citrus, sugar, and cattle ranching. And the cattle ranching it takes up a lot of space. It's 1 million acres, but is a pretty low impact type of agriculture. So I hope that answers that question.
Actually, maybe we could ask Evelyn to tell us a little bit about algal blooms and particularly what we know about Lake Annie, because her knowledge, and she has to go, so I'll give her 2 minutes to answer this question.
Sure. I was just writing
a
little note that I have to run at 10:30 for another meeting. But as Dustin said, we have these algae blooms happening all over the state and places that are receiving runoff from agriculture and other kinds of activities that are happening within the boundaries of the lakes. And this is a real problem, and we're trying to figure out what we can do about it and how to divert water into places, divert water that contains all those nutrients that support those algal blooms into places where the nutrients can be removed before they enter into our lakes and into our Everglades. Luckily, Lake Annie hasn't been susceptible to that, and so we do get little blooms of algae, but they're kind algae. They're algae that help support food webs and the little animals that eat them, and all the way up to the fishes. But they're not the nasty kinds of blooms that we think about associated with the harmful algae blooms that are happening elsewhere in the state.
I know Evelyn has to run off, so I'd like to take a minute on behalf of the summer campus to thank her very much. You have no idea what a special treat you had. Evelyn is a world expert on the Everglades. She knows a tremendous amount about plankton, and Lake Annie is one of her favorite research sites. So we're really lucky to have her at Archbold, and you're all really lucky to be listening to her. So thanks for joining us, Evelyn. We appreciate your time. We'll do this again, I think. It was cool.
Thanks, Evelyn.
Okay, Dustin, we just have one more question from Kai. Is the bottom of the lake soft or hard?
Depends on which part of it you're in. It's sandy right here. It's all sand. But over where the buoy is, I think it's like 2 acres, something like that spot in the middle. That's that real deep spot. That's all muck over there. And that's where they were able to go and take a core, because it's layers and layers and layers of pollen and dead, old plant material. So I don't know what it would actually feel like if you put your foot in it. I don't know if you would just, stink how deep is it, like 10 feet of that? I'm not really sure.
So I'll maybe help you out there quickly, Dustin. The longest core we have is 38 feet. And it's some of it's easier to push through. Some of it it's kind of like black mayonnaise on the top. And then as you get deeper down, so don't think of this as a hard layer. There's some sort of rubbery layers. And as you said, Lake Annie is like a perfect cone coming to the bottom with this deep hole, this deep sort of collecting point of, I would use the word sediments rather than muck, because it's really pressed together. The rest of the lake is all sandy. So you can think of it like you're at a beach and you've dug a really deep hole and it's full of water. That's a bit what Lake Annie is. It's a hole in a huge sand ridge. And at the very bottom of that hole, all of the algae and all of the dust and all of the sediments that have blown into the lake, the charcoal and everything, gather and gather and gather over thousands of years to form that deep sediment at the bottom. It's like it's been a very precious scientific collecting site for us for thousands of years. I cannot tell you that people around the world, they look to Lake Annie as one of the great research sites on the world. It is so special because it has these incredible sediments that never dried out and were never glaciated. And that is very rare on the east coast of the US. So we are so, so lucky that it just happened to be right next to Archbold. That's maybe a good point to end on.
Yeah, that sounds good to me. Well, thank you everybody for coming out for our virtual field trip. It's been a wonderful experience the last couple months doing these. So hopefully we'll be able to come out and share some nature together at some point. But I'm sure we'll do some more virtual stuff down the road. We're not going to stop doing these things. So have a great day, everybody. Thanks, Hillary.
Thank you, Dustin. You did a terrific job. That was cool.
Yes, thank you, Dustin. Thank you very much to our special guest. And that was great. That was a great ending for our June field trips. So as we know, this was the last field trip, but you can join us again next week for our Thursday seminar series, July 9th at 3:30. Archbold Plant Ecology intern Scott Ward will present endemic plants of the Lake Wales Ridge. So we'll see you all soon.